This is Mr. Downing Bolls, senior, and it's April 21st, 1999, 11:30. Interviewer is Utah Reuter, and camera woman is Susan Acuna. Mr. Bowles, um, can you tell me a little bit about your parents, their names, and where you were born?
My father was also named Downing McCord. I was born in Rowe, Arkansas, which is about 70 miles southeast of Little Rock. My father was a railroad brakeman on the Cotton Belt Railroad. And needless to say, I got to make a number of trips when I was growing up because I could get a free pass any place we wanted to go.
Wow.
I had an uncle, Sam Knox, who was also a railroad conductor on the Illinois Central. And when I got ready to go to Vicksburg to visit my grandmother, I could ride the Cotton Belt to Memphis and the IC to Vicksburg. My mother was Emma Jeline Fortune. She contracted tuberculosis fairly early in life and spent some time in the state sanitarium at Boonville, Arkansas. Was pronounced in remission one time, came home for about 3 months. It recurred. She went back to the sanitarium. They finally decided they could do no more for her, and she was sent home to die. And I was fortunate to be there. I was sitting on her bedside at the time she died. The last words she said were, "I wouldn't mind going if I could take him with me."
Oh.
And it's a memory, but life goes on.
How old was she?
She was 27 when she died. Dad remarried after that, but he continued working for the Cotton Belt Railroad. But I grew up in Arkansas and spent some time in Mississippi with my grandparents over there. And I was working in Stuttgart, Arkansas, which is near where I was born, just about the same distance from Little Rock, for a co-op as a painter. When my draft number was called up, and I reported to Camp Joseph T. Robinson, Arkansas, for processing on the 12th of August, 1942.
How old were you?
I was, I would have been 22 at the time. I was nearing 22. I would be 22 the following November. And they had taken us over to camp and sworn us in and given us 14 days to go back home and get our affairs in order. I said, when you come back 2 weeks from now, you're going to stay, so be sure you take care of all your business. Did, reported in on the 26th to Camp Robinson, went through the processing, issued uniform shots, mental testing, indoctrination, all of those kind of things. Got my first smell of mothballs on uniforms. Mm-hmm. And then they loaded us aboard a train and sent us to Camp Barkeley and arrived here on the 1st of September, 1942. Unloaded off of the Santa Fe Railroad out at View. I remember looking at that post office sign out there when I got off the train. Very interesting name, View, Texas. Mm-hmm. And they had some trucks there, Army trucks, and carted us to our billeting area. And we started off in tents in the area of the camp that they called Tortilla Flats. Now this is one thing that GIs were geniuses at, was assigning names to everything. Tortilla Flats is later where they had the German POW camp. But we spent about 6 weeks in the tents there in Tortilla Flats, and they were working on the Barkeley Heights, which was a hutment type encampment over on the southeast corner of the post. And just before the training was over, they moved us over there. When the training was over, I was retained as cadre because they were expanding the MRTC at that time. And I started off as a private assisting a platoon sergeant and got to learn the ropes. And we did a certain amount of instructing of the trainees. This was basic training for medical troops. And then I stayed there for, I guess, close to 3 years. Made buck sergeant. Didn't look like we were going anywhere, and they were getting ready to open a new training center up at Fort Lewis, Washington, near Tacoma. So I applied to go up there and did. But when we got up there were no openings for promotion. So I applied for OCS and was sent back to Barkeley to take my OCS training. Got back to Barkeley again around the latter part of August or 1st of September, and spent 17 weeks in the officer candidate school there, and was commissioned at Camp Barkeley, second lieutenant MAC. So I had a chance to be in the country here for a while, a little over 3 years. And
what was your first impression when you stepped off the train?
when I stepped off the train, this country was in the middle of a 7-year drought. Everything was parched and dry. I came from a section of the country where cotton grows from shoulder high.
Oh.
On one of our road marches out toward Buffalo Gap, I saw a farm out there where the cotton was only about a foot high. And how a person could make a living growing cotton that small, I didn't know. But under drought conditions, the land was parched. They were just doing the best they could, waiting for the weather to moderate.
You took lots of long marches and...
Oh yes, out Old Housing Road, out to Buffalo Gap, out 707 toward Wiley. Any place along the road that you could get to march. But the training, we assisted in the training of the basic troops. We taught such things as creeping and crawling, keeping your head down so that you don't get your head shot off. Digging fortifications like trenches, foxholes, and things of that nature. How to dig them, how to conceal them. Camouflage, which was very important. As well as the medical subjects like first aid, transportation of sick and wounded. Field expedients, how to make do with things to take care of the troops when you don't have anything, don't have your bandages. Improvising. And it was very interesting training. And we realized that the men that we sent out were going to have to take care of the fighting people. So we tried to do the very best job that we could to instruct them so when they got out there as a company aid man, they could do the job that they needed to. Of course, a lot of the men went from there into training in hospitals as ward attendants, ward men. We also sent some to transportation for ambulance driver training. The medics did just about everything because we had to blend right in with whatever force we were supporting. Artillery, infantry, armor, whatever.
Did you meet anybody that stands out? I know you met a lot of people.
Oh, I still have some of the old Barclayites that are around. There are a couple that I can talk with and write to periodically. Unfortunately, some of the others have recently passed away. I did have an opportunity to find them and talk to them before they died, and I still correspond with their families.
Do you remember their names?
Yes, John Esslinger from Gutenberg, Iowa. I equated that with the Gutenberg Bible. Mm-hmm. And John was a platoon sergeant. And one of the high points of our service out here, on a weekend, we could get a room out at the Wooten Hotel, the 19th-story Wooten. Bring our little ditty bag with a clean uniform in, shaving gear. We could take a hot shower, put on a clean uniform, and go down to Red Steuman's and have a steak. And Red Steuman made the best steak that we have ever tasted. Red Steuman was right across the street from Fischel's that had the...
bridal shop?
Yeah, bridal shop. Mm-hmm. And that area is now occupied by the Reporter News. They took that rest of that building in and converted it. And I understand that a few years after he closed the restaurant, Red Steuman died while fishing in a stock tank out south of town. And after the steak, we'd usually go to the Paramount and see a good show. And then go on up and get a good night's sleep in a good soft bed, and wake up refreshed the next day, get back out to camp, and we're ready to go out.
Sounds like a real treat.
Yeah. And various ones would team up together and come in and share the expense of a room. But I met my wife here in Abilene. Betty was born and raised in Abilene, Betty Higgins. She worked as a sales clerk at McClellan's 5 and 10 cent store. And I had gone in the week before with John and talked to the girl that ran the little photo concession. You'd get the little 1x2-inch photos, instant pictures to send home. We just went by to talk with her. And I noticed Betty was working over behind the china counter. When I came in the next week, she was over in toys. And I had come in especially to get a birthday present for my younger brother. He's 10 years younger than I am. And so I went by the toy counter and asked her to help me make a selection. We got to talking. And I found out what time she took her break. I asked her if she'd like to have a Coke. They had a drugstore across the street called Sloan's that made the best pimento cheese sandwiches and Cokes that you can imagine. So we went over there, and that got it started. We just got to talking, and pretty soon we were dating. We'd come in, go to the show. One of the things that impressed me about Abilene was the friendliness of the people. Now, their young men have all gone off to war. You didn't see a young civilian man in Abilene at that time. The Army, Navy, Marine Corps, they've got them all. But never once did I hear of any resentment to the people about sharing their facilities with us. On any given day, there would be 60,000 men out here at Camp Barkeley. And on weekends, of course, everybody could get a pass, came in for the movie, whatever. They invited us into their homes to eat. They shared all of their facilities, restaurants, clothing stores, the whole bit. Never once did I hear of any resentment. This wasn't true in some of the other places in Texas, because I took a couple of troop trains of soldiers to an army camp, and while there I would go into the nearby town to have a meal and spend the night. And you'd come to a restaurant and have a sign on the door saying, "No dogs, no soldiers." So you can imagine, with the reception that you got in Abilene, this was a nice place to be.
I hadn't realized that. Well, that's
Oh
great.
yeah, there were places that resented the presence of the military very much. It was interesting that from time to time you would take a trainload of troops to some place and drop them off and get a chance to see some of the country and come back. Once John Essling and I had to go to Columbia, South Carolina and pick up an AWOL prisoner and escort him back to Camp Barkeley. Now that was a long trip, all by train, steam train. But we made it there and made it back, and we told the boy when we picked him up, "Now son, we can do this one of two ways. We can either put these handcuffs on you and you can be real uncomfortable, or if you promise not to try to run away, we'll put the handcuffs back in the bag and you can join us." So he decided he'd be a good boy, and he was. He didn't try to escape. So
And why were y'all sent as opposed to, did y'all not have military police?
yeah, they had military police, but military police are tied up performing their duties. And usually what you would do would be send someone from the unit out there to pick them up. So that was what we did. These little breaks from the humdrum routine made it interesting to be out there. You just ran into all kinds of things. Rather late in the training out there, they taught us something about booby traps. How if you go into a village that has been occupied by the enemy, they love to set booby traps and blow you up. You see a board there, you pick up the board, you might just be releasing a trigger. And they had these little small fusees that would pop. But they would take the regular booby traps and set them out, and then you would go through the village and try to get through without getting blown up. And they had both pressure and pressure release devices, as well as trip wires and things of that nature. They also taught us something about explosives, which came in handy at a much later date. The use of primacord, which is a cord that explodes at the rate of 4 miles per second, which is pretty fast. Also the use of quarter-pound blocks of TNT and sticks of dynamite. Very late in my career, when I was stationed at Gunter Air Force Base, Alabama, I had been on a military exercise Sagebrush down in Louisiana, where they played atomic warfare games. The Army made simulated atomic bombs by using 55-gallon drums of oil, motor oil, and gasoline sunk in the ground, and then using quarter-pound charges of TNT to blow it up and set it on fire, and the primacord to hook it all together. I made one of those for an exhibition at Gunter Air Force Base, Alabama. I was sent up to the arsenal in Maryland to pick up all the components and also to get the written instruction of how to make it. And brought it back, set it up, and the demonstration went off perfectly.
That sounds dangerous.
Oh, it is. Well, it's dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. But this was one of the reasons why they taught us, is so that you don't get in trouble by doing the wrong thing. As long as you keep the blasting caps away from the explosive, you've got no problem. It's when you get the two together and you get careless that bad things happen. But I had a very interesting and varied career. I appreciated the fact that I had an opportunity to go to OCS. I had been a platoon sergeant for almost 3 years at the time I went to OCS. And one of the things that they emphasize very heavily is your military bearing. The fact that you can command troops, you can give commands, drill the troops, move troops where they need to be moved. I had been doing it for 3 years. There were some of the guys that had no experience like that were having to learn. They had a problem when they took positions as squad leader, platoon leader, company commander, and so forth. And you're only supposed to get one of these leadership positions one time. They tapped me 4 times while I was going through.
Well, that's good.
But the military was good to me. I had no occupation at the time. I'd always made my living by manual labor, painting, things of that nature. That's what I had to look forward to. So when the war was over, I had a commission, was a first lieutenant. They said, you can stay if you want to. I said, okay, I'll hang around. And at that time, I had been moved from the Army to the Air Force, to the Air Corps. I went to France when the war was over with the Army of Occupation at a medical depot, Montmoulin-le-Petit, which is about it's the same size as Montmoulin-le-Grand.
Oh.
But stayed at the medical depot for about 6 months, and they were going to close it down and give the assets to the French and send the rest of the troops to Germany. Well, fortunately, I was sent to an aviation medicine dispensary in Bad Kissingen, Germany. My first contact with the Air Corps. While we were there, this would have been late 46. In early 47, February 47, the Air Corps broke away from the Army and became an Air Force. Well, all of the medics were still Army. And you could stay in the Army and just do your duty until they got their own medics. Or you could actually transfer if you wanted to. I said, this is a new branch of the service. I'll transfer. And I was never sorry afterwards.
Good decision. Had you married by that time?
Yes, Betty and I married in 45, May the 5th, 1945.
While you were at Barkeley?
Well, no, I had just left Barkeley. I was commissioned in the 6th of December, the day before Pearl Harbor Day, in 44. Went to Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, which is near Fort Smith, which was my first duty station. Betty came up one time for a visit while I was up there. And while we were there, we decided we would like to get married. So I called her father, asked for her hand. He gave us permission. And she came up, and we were married at the Post Chapel at Fort Chaffee by an Episcopal minister. And he used the Episcopal marriage ceremony from the Book of Prayer. And I want you to know that is the most impressive that I have ever heard. And Betty's going to kill me for telling you this. While we were going in the minister's office getting the paperwork done, the marriage license signed and everything, getting our instructions, Betty was tearing a handkerchief to shreds, and I kept patting her hands. It's all right, darling, it's all right. It'll be all right. When we started down the aisle and the wedding march struck up, my knees began to shake, and she had to hold my arm and help me down the aisle. But we made it, and we've been together ever since.
Still going strong.
Yeah, still going strong.
That's great. You mentioned Pearl Harbor. What went through your mind when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
This is war. This is definitely war, which is going to mean devastation, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, death. Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me, I might be one of the dead. Mm-hmm. You just never know, because wars are fought usually by young men. Mm-hmm. They're started by old men. It's been true throughout history. And I was working at a service station in Rowe, Arkansas, the day, on Sunday, the day Pearl Harbor was born. I worked 7 days a week there. Man had a small service station, pumped gasoline, had a small line of groceries in the back, and he had the only beer joint in town. But needless to say, it was a very popular place. And I was working there, didn't have anybody else in the station, when the boss who lived right behind the station came over and said, the Japs have attacked Pearl Harbor. Just heard it on the radio. So he brought the radio over into the station so we could listen to the news broadcast. And it was a very sober time. And he was an elderly gentleman who had been present during World War I. And he began to relate some of the things that happened during World War I, how the military operated, the training, national mobilization, and so forth. So needless to say, when they declared war, national mobilization was declared. I think I had already signed up for the draft, had my draft notice. And the girl who signed me up had been the best friend of my mother, Joe Menace, was the representative from the draft board who signed me up and issued the call for me to come up and, on August the 12th when I went in. But so many people, of course being in the training business out here, we had a cadre of about 12 that marched the troops, controlled the troops. Plus we had the administrative personnel in the office, the company commander, the first sergeant, the company clerk, the supply clerk, the supply sergeant. We had our own mess, the mess sergeant, and he had about, I'd say, 8 or 10 bakers and cooks that did all the food preparation. And the dishes were washed by us grunts.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in other words, they needed KPs up there to swab the floors and wash the dishes and scrub the pots and pans. And we were detailed to it, and when your day came, you got up early in the morning and spent all day up there at the mess hall.
Was that a favorite activity?
It was not. It was one that nobody wanted. You also pulled guard duty. Because of security, you had to have a 24-hour guard. And if you were selected for guard duty, you'd usually wear a pistol belt and carry a billy club. And also have an armband, what they call a brassard, on your arm that denoted you as a guard. And you had to learn your 12 general orders. The first one is to take charge of this post and all government property in view. And there used to be a joke about that. They couldn't find a guard one night, and they found him over view, and he said, "I'm just carrying out my first general order. Take charge of this post and all government property in view." And here I am.
In view.
In view.
Oh, that's funny.
But again, the life was sort of varied. You didn't get into that much of a rut or routine, and the training was progressively a little harder, a little harder. We also had PT. You got up in the morning, before you had breakfast, you had to do your jumping up and down and get the blood circulating and everything.
How was the climate and weather? Did you have trouble with that?
Not too much. It was hot, of course, during the summertime, but after you'd been here for a while, you got acclimatized to it. They made sure that you took plenty of water, and back in those days, they gave you salt tablets and emphasized that you need salt intake because of the salt you're losing through perspiration. And we didn't have that much trouble. Now, we'd get a new group in during the summertime. You had to watch those real close because some of these guys weren't in good physical condition. And they'd pass out on you. You go on a road march and this guy just buckles and falls. And we always had an ambulance following at the end of the train. You just pull him off to the side and leave somebody with him to get him in the ambulance, get him back on his feet. And then this guy'd have to run and catch up with the column. But boy, we did a lot of road marching, and our company commander insisted that we march faster than the infantry. The infantry marched at an average pace of 3 miles per hour. We marched a little faster than that. We did some close to 4. But back in those days, you know, you were already accustomed to it because with the war on, gasoline is rationed, tires are rationed, a lot of things are rationed. Food, sugar, meat. In fact, the only thing that wasn't rationed is chicken. You get to where you like chicken real quick.
What other things stand out in your mind about your time here?
The size of it, the constant turnover, and as far as the MRTC was concerned, turnover of people. Now, the combat units, of course, they were the guys who were going to stay together throughout the entire war. We'd get a group of people in 2 months later, 2.5 months later, we finished their training, they go. We got another group in after a week. We have 1 week to clean things up and get ready for the new group to come in. But as a platoon sergeant, I'd have about 75 men in my platoon, and 4 platoons in each company. So we had roughly 250, 280 men. By the 3rd day, I knew the first name, middle initial, and last name of every man in my platoon, and knew him by face. And as long as I was training men, this was fine. After I was commissioned, I read a book by Bennett Cerf, a noted humorist. Bennett Cerf said that when he was introduced, he promptly forgot the name. He just went blank. It happened to me. Thereafter, I had the darndest trouble remembering the names of people. Didn't have any trouble with it before. The power of suggestion.
Yeah. That's great. Did you ever go overseas during the war?
Not during the war. It was after the war. In February of '46 that I went over for the Army of Occupation. Up to that time, I was with the station hospital at Camp Chaffee. And I had some interesting jobs there. The first job that I had was physical reconditioning. They sent me on a 1-month course at Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. And we learned all about anatomy and physiology, especially about wound ballistics and things of this nature, so that we could come back and get the guys who had been wounded in war, and through the process of exercise and proper care, get them back to duty faster. So that was my first job. And I've had a variety of jobs. I can't think of anything that I did that ever really got boring.
That's good. That's good. Let's go back a little bit to your childhood. What kind of things stand out in your mind during your childhood? Did you come from a large family?
No, I was the only child from my mother and father. When Dad remarried, he had 2 children by his second wife, and his second wife is dead now, but the 2 brothers, half-brothers, still live back in Arkansas, and I see them every once in a while. We correspond, we talk on the phone, love them, they're nice to have as family. They both work at a paper mill in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Hey, if you've ever been close to a paper mill, have you?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Then you know the odor that emanates from
Yes,
the use of the chemicals.
I was at Crossett one time. I think they have paper mills there.
Yeah.
You can smell it.
Yeah.
It's
And
real strong.
I told him, I said, fellas, I'm glad I stayed in the military. And you might have been wise to do the same.
Well, I don't know. There's some smells around here that takes some getting used to, too. Cattle.
I live mostly out in the country. Now, Pine Bluff was a fairly sizable town. Had 2 railroads come through there, the Cotton Belt, or St. Louis Southwestern, and the Missouri Pacific. They both had large marshaling yards there, where they would put large freight trains together. The railroads operated on a through freight and a local. The through freight would say bring stuff from St. Louis to Pine Bluff. At Pine Bluff, they'd put the cars in the marshaling yards and break them down into locals. Then a little short local would go one way head north, another one would head south, and drop off the cars at the little towns on the siding, distributing the goods. And Dad worked both on the through freights and on the locals.
And your uncle also was in the railroad?
Yeah, he was with the Illinois Central, but he was a passenger conductor.
You didn't have any desire to follow in their footsteps?
No, not really. It was interesting watching them, both of them work, and seeing how they had to do it. There was a very definite procedure that you followed in coupling and uncoupling freight cars. Because they had well, for one thing, they had these great big hoses that you had to join together in order for the air brakes to work. Mm-hmm. And whenever you got ready to uncouple cars, you had a pin stuck down in the coupling, and a lever over here at the side that you would pull up. It would pull that pin up and let the coupling open so that the engine could pull the car away. And you had to do it in all kinds of weather. The lubrication of the wheels of the boxcars was provided by what they call a hot box. The axle floated in well, it didn't float, but it rested in a kind of a bogie that had an iron cover to the box. And you would take this cotton waste, which is just cotton thread from a mill, take a bunch of this waste and put it in there around the axle and squirt oil on it. And Dad had a humongous oil can, and this provided the lubrication for the car wheels on both the passenger and the freight cars. Sometimes on a freight train going out, you'd be up in the cupola looking up the line, and you'd see smoke begin to boil up. Whoop. The engineer would see it. He'd shut the train down. Dad would grab his oil can, run up there, and he had a little poker that he used to open the thing up with. He'd take some extra waste with him, pull the old waste out, put new waste in, squirt oil on it, put the cap back down, highlight, give the highlight to the engineer, and off we go again.
Did they ever have the big accidents like they do these days?
Not many. The trains weren't regulated from a central control point like they are today. They had a station agent at all of the depots along the way. Excuse me. And the station agent was able to send and receive Morse code. And if they had a message they wanted to get to this train crew coming through, they would send it, the station agent would copy it down, then he had a couple of big loops that had a clip on, a paper clip. He'd take the message and clip it on there and go out with the loop and hold it up, and whenever the train came by, either the engineer or the fireman would lean out of the cab, put his arm like that, and catch the loop. Pull the paper off, throw the loop back.
Oh my God.
The same way when they got down to the caboose, either the conductor or the brakeman would lean out, get it with his hand, pull off the message and throw it back down. Now the front end and the back end both have a copy of the communication that's designed for the train. They know what to do. Could be that they're supposed to get off on the siding at the next line and make way for a through train coming through. Could be a troop train. Before I left to put my stand into the service, we used to get a lot of troop trains coming through. And they would have car after car with tanks, half-tracks, jeeps, trucks, you know, moving the things of war.
And what if they missed the loop?
Well, if they missed the loop, they had to guess that engineer is going to put the train where it's supposed to go.
Things have really progressed since
Yeah,
then.
and each train run had a switch key. They had to keep those switches locked because vandals would come by and throw the switch, and next thing you know, the whole train ends up out in the cow pasture on a ranch. So, one of the things that a brakeman and the fireman did on both ends of the train, when you get ready to take that train off on a different siding, was to stop the train, get down, undo the switch, throw the switch, and put the lock back on it, and let the train proceed. After the train got all the way through, the brakeman on the other end would get down and put the switch back where it was supposed to be. So the through trains didn't run into them. Once in a great while, you might get a train that didn't pull all the way off, and you might have a collision. But usually, the oncoming train could see it was going to hit it, and he put on the emergency brake, and they just slid down and chromed into it. But didn't have really too much trouble. It ran pretty good. Certainly ran better than what a lot of them do today.
I know, you always hear about those.
Yeah,
big
the electronics
accidents.
break down, short circuit.
Let's go back a little bit. I don't know if we're going back further or not, but about the Depression. Do you remember anything about the Depression? How was your life affected?
Very well.
Really?
Frugally.
Frugally.
The Depression hit the cities about 1930, 31. And if you were living in Pine Bluff, there was a lot of unemployment. Now, Dad worked for the railroad, but the railroads were having to do some cutting back. There was not as much produce, not as much product to move, because business was bad with the factories. They were laying off people. Nobody was buying. So consequently, the railroads didn't have as much to move. And Dad fought what he called the extra board. That is, if they were going to put a train together, because now they had enough freight to move, they would pick up a crew of the guys who were waiting around, waiting for a job. And he would go down, his name would be on the extra board, and he would get in with a train crew, and they might move a train, say, from a train load of cotton from Pine Bluff to Memphis. Or they might take a load of machinery from Pine Bluff down to Camden or Texarkana, somewhere like that. And you had to watch your money. I've forgotten what we paid for rent, but it couldn't have been more than about $20 a month for rent in a house that had been converted to a little apartment. There were 3 families that lived in there. All had kitchens, but we all shared the same bath. I went to school, but you didn't have a closet full of clothes like the kids do these days. You had 1 pair of shoes, and you doggone well took care of them, because there wasn't money to buy another pair before the next year when you outgrew them. During the time that we were there, we were adequately fed. But I was in the country in 1934 when the Depression hit the country. Out there, the people had planted cotton. You're always going to have a market for cotton. In the spring, by the time the fall came around ready to pick the cotton, you couldn't get a penny a pound for the cotton. And you had to pay a penny a pound to get it picked. So you just left the cotton in the field to rot. Unfortunately, expecting to have the income to buy food, we didn't raise gardens that year. That winter was pretty bleak as far as food and clothing. Didn't have the money to buy clothing. Had to make do with what you already had. I'm a growing boy and I've just about outgrown last year's clothing. That jacket is mighty tight. So are the pants. And we had an uncle that had raised a 5-acre patch of whippoorwill peas as pea vine hay for his horse. Well, he found out early on there's not going to be enough food because we didn't raise gardens. Horse, you're going to have to get by on grass this winter. And we pull those peas, dry, shelled them out, put them in buckets. And that's what we lived on, that and whatever rabbits we could catch that winter. To this day, I do not want to taste another whippoorwill pea.
I bet not.
But the following year, my grandfather made plans during the winter, and he was a German farmer, and we got the ground and the garden fences and everything all ready. And he planted a garden the next year, and the following year we had plenty of food. I mean, we were really eating high on the hog. Now, we didn't raise much else, but we had plenty of food. But one thing that I did notice about it was in a time of hardship, neighbors shared. You could go by somebody's house when they were getting ready to have dinner, and they knew that you weren't going to have much at your place, but they would invite you to come in and have dinner. And of course, you'd, out of politeness, protest, no, I better go on. They would insist, come have dinner with us. But they shared. Anything that you needed and they had, they were willing to share it with you. It seems like that in adversity, America pulled together. And of course, before too many years, the war came along and America really did pull together.
You think the war was one of the main things that got us out of the Depression?
Only partly, and I'll tell you the reason why. Franklin Roosevelt was a student of Keynesian economics. That is, the government has a place in the marketplace because government, through spending, can regulate employment, unemployment, prices, wages, the whole thing. And he came in prepared to exercise Keynesian economics. One of the first things that he did was to repeal the 18th Amendment. Beer began to flow. People ask me, get talking about who is the father of country music, and I tell them, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. When those beer joints got established around the country, these old boys would always have a quarter left over for a couple of beers at the local beer joint on Saturday night. Then it got to be boring sitting around drinking beer on Saturday night. Wurlitzer and Seaberg came in and put jukeboxes in. Now, back in those days, they only had the 78 RPM records, so you only had about a dozen pieces of music on there.
I see the connection.
But it was the kind that the old country boys liked. Ernest Tubbs, Walking the Floor Over You, Pistol Packin' Mama by Al Dexter. And then the guys found that they could bring their girls down with them and dance to this kind of music. Well, along about this time, Seaberg and Wurlitzer found out that they had developed a 45 RPM record. Smaller record, and you could put a lot more of them on the jukebox. Now there is a demand for this country music. So all of the guys, Bob Wills, Milton Brown and his musical brownies, Cliff Bruner and the Texas Wanderers, all of them are cranking out this jukebox music. Honky-tonk is what it was.
Yeah. Because
these were honky-tonks, beer joints, honky-tonks. And the boxes began to fill up with this kind of music. Well, Nashville, the country guru, had to make it respectable, so they called it country, and western. Now, where did the western influence come from? Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys, Ernest Tubb, the Texas Troubadour, Cliff Bruner and the Texas Wanderers, Ted Daffin's Texans. These were the people who were putting the music on the jukeboxes. So every self-respecting string band in America went out and bought cowboy outfits. And Nashville had to be in control. It's country and western. What it is honky-tonk. If you put people in an auditorium and play to them, it's country concert, or concert country. If they dance to it, it's honky-tonk. Pure and simple.
I see the distinction.
I was there when it was born. I played it. Now this gets us far afield from Camp Barkeley. When we came here, incidentally, they didn't have beer, they didn't have jukeboxes, and they didn't have dancing.
That's what I heard. Except I did hear that the 45th was the dancingest bunch of boys that ever went through Camp Barkeley.
I take this back. They used to have Saturday night dances at the Woodman Hall. And a good friend of mine who was a cook out at Camp Barkeley in our outfit, Leroy Bradbury, met his wife up at the dance at the Woodman Hall, Grace. And when the war was over, Brad came back to Abilene and got into various businesses. His wife still lives here in Abilene. Brad died, I guess, about 15 years ago of cancer. He had gone home to Arkansas. He came from a place about 15 miles from my home. And he was shaving and nicked a little place on his neck. Had it looked at by his doctor when he got back and found it was cancer.
Oh.
6 months later, he was gone. And I read about it in the paper. I wouldn't have known it. So we went to his funeral and went by to express condolences to Grace. And suddenly Grace realized, forgot to invite you. Forgot to call you and let you know. Yeah. But we had quite a few boys from Arkansas that came over here, as well as quite a few from Texas.
Let's see, was the 45th from Arkansas? They were from
no,
Oklahoma.
the 45th was, I believe, was either an Oklahoma or Texas. I think the 45th was Texas. The 90th was Texas, Oklahoma. Now that was an Oklahoma National Guard outfit, but it had the TO sign, which stands for Texas and Oklahoma on their patch. The 45th was a Thunderbird. The 45th had they were still in the process of moving out when I got here. And the 90th was just moving in. But I had a chance to see the 90th train. After the 90th, the 11th Armored came in, was here during all of their training. And then the 12th Armored was the last unit to train here. And each one of these combat divisions would have around 18 to 20,000 men. And it was something I got to thinking about. In addition to the people who were doing the training in the MRTC and the combat units, you had a permanent party here, Quartermaster Corps. They got the train loads of food, supplies, and things of that nature, and put them in the warehouses and issued them to the troops. You had the station hospital complex. They had a big station hospital over there. Those people were permanent party assigned here to Barkeley. You also had the motor pool of people that operated the vehicles that moved everything. You had the Corps of Engineers that took care of the sanitation, the water lines. So with between the people who were involved in training as well as the permanent party that needed to support them, we had a big outfit here. I mean, we had a big city and a lot of people.
Well, it's been really enlightening. Thank you very much, Mr. Bolls. I really
Been my
enjoyed
pleasure.
talking
Oh,
to you.
while we're at it, all of the units that trained here had a picture made. Okay.
Let me see if I can pick you.
Now I am a trainee in this picture. See if you can find me.
I doubt I can. Oh, my goodness.
Now this is the size of a company, which would be 4 platoons. There were 4 of these companies to each medical training battalion. We were in Company D. This is Company D of the 62nd. Now, this Goldbeck is the guy that made all of these pictures. And Goldbeck made pictures of every unit on Camp Barkeley. And if you want a copy of it, I know where the negatives are.
Oh, good. That's great, yeah. That's
They're
great.
down at the University of Texas in Austin. Goldbeck turned everything prior to 74 over to the university. And that's where I got this picture from.
That's good to know. Thank you. Okay.
He had a system where he would put the date and the unit designation. You see that the last three numbers there are 462.
Mm-hmm.
62 is the 62nd Medical Training Battalion.
Mm.
4 is ABCD, Company D.
Mm-hmm.
Now Company A would have been 162.
Ah, okay.
And then the other numbers represent the month and the year.
Yeah. Okay. Huh.
So if you want
That's
a
neat.
copy
That's
of the
good
picture,
to know. He may want to get some of
coincidentally,
those.
I ought to be able to find me here. I was around the middle of the, yeah, right here. There I am.
Well, aren't you cute? You're still cute.
Oh, I wouldn't say that. Now here's one from later on, when I was on the cadre. I ought to be on that front row.
If I can pick you out. I thought that was you. I should have been brave enough to pick. That's neat.
But you got to see an awful lot of men,
Right.
and these were fine men. And this is one of the things that made you realize what a waste war is. What a waste. And it reminds me, I ask people, why do we insist on glorifying it?
Yeah. I know it.
But it was an interesting time of life. There are a lot of advances in medicine, engineering, certainly a lot of advances in warfare. They were learning bigger and better ways to kill people. And that's one of the things that Americans do better than anybody else in the world, is kill people.
What was your thoughts on Iwo Jima and that?
I think that the Pacific War was a much dirtier war than the one in Europe and North Africa. And the reason is that the Japanese were so well entrenched. And these boys had to go in there and dig them out and burn them out. And when they had the big brouhaha with celebrating D-Day in Europe, I wrote a letter to the editor and said, how about remembering the boys in the Pacific? They had a lot of D-Days there. One for every vermin-infested island that they had to take back from the Japanese.
At what cost?
At what cost? And they still have American military cemeteries over there. They're talking about building a monument to World War II up in Washington. And I'm here to tell you I'm opposed to it. In Saint-Avold, France, there's a large American military cemetery where the casualties from Normandy are buried. Now, there's nothing to me more impressive than that big line of crosses and Stars of David that marks each man's resting place. A much more fitting monument than anything that you can build in Washington, regardless of how high, how wide, or how long.
Yeah.
But we must glorify war. What a tragedy.
Did you see the movie Saving Private Ryan? Or would you?
No, I haven't seen it yet. But I saw the, there are a lot of war movies that we got a chance to see. But I would like to see it because they tell me that it was very realistic. And I'm sure that in time when it's going to be, we'll go look at it.
They say it's really realistic.
But Barkeley was really it was the first time that the farm boy got off the farm. But it gave me a chance to see a lot of the country, meet a lot of people, and feel like I was making a contribution. And that was very satisfying.
Well, you did too.
And needless to say, when our military career was over, Dice was my last duty station out here. I was hospital administrator. Spent 3 years out there, and I told Betty, I said, hey, we've moved enough. Because every time you moved, they broke things. And you never got compensated for it.
Yeah.
Let's stay here.
Yeah.
Because she still had family here.
Well, yeah. Well, that's great.
So we retired here and haven't been sorry.
Well, that's great.
Camp Barkeley.
Well, it sure has been a pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. It's been nice going back down memory lane and relating some of the things that happened here. And I'm sure you'll find a lot of other people that were as impressed as I was by what happened here.
Well, you've been a valuable asset to our project. I really thank you.
Well, thank you. And if there's any way I could be of assistance, let me know.
Okay. That's it. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Wonderful.